Welcome back. Today we're going to be going through a new topic, which is called the hyperbola. Hyperbola is a graph that we haven't seen before. It doesn't look quite like a parabola, nor does it look like a circle. So let's get started to find out what the equation of this hyperbola graph looks like. So the equation of this graph will look in the form of y equals k over x. Okay, this is where k will be any other constant, meaning any other number. It can be -1, can be 2, so on. Okay, this equation can be written as xy equals to k. Okay, that's just a note. But what I would like you to focus on is that new form called y equals k over x. The graph will look something like this. Again, it's going to look a little bit different than a parabola, nor a circle, or a exponential graph. So yeah, let's go to an example and see what happens with this graph. So in this graph right here, right, in our example, it says complete the following table and draw the graph of y equals 1 over x. Okay, got a table of values, and I'm going to just put my x values into my equation. To put it into your equation, it would look like this. 1 over -4. That will result me into -1/4, -1/3. You can use the calculator as well. Okay, this is just calculator work. This is -1/2, -1. This one right here, -1/2, right? To put it into the calculator, this is how you're going to put it into the calculator. First, you're going to press the fraction button and put in the numerator 1. Then in the denominator, you're going to press the fraction button one more time and put in the numerator in that second fraction, -1 over 2. Okay, so the numerator will be -1 in that second fraction, and the denominator in that second fraction will be 2. If you press equal, you should get the answer of -2. This will be -4. This will be -8. If you put this into the calculator, this will be the exact same, just without the negative. That will be +8, +4, +2. This will be +1. This will change into, if you put it into a calculator, half. This will be 1/3. This will be 1/4. Okay. Now, once I've got my completed table of values, I'm going to sketch it or graph it into a Cartesian plane. So I've got my Cartesian plane here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph it. Okay. So in this box here, on this column here, this coordinate will look like this: -4, -1/4. Okay, I'm going to find -4 in my x-axis, which is that black dot there. And I'm going to go down because it's a -1/4. So I'm going to put it about here. Okay, now I'm going to keep going. -3 as my x value. My y value is -1/3. Let's say I'm putting it up here. Then -2 is going to be half. Let's say I'm going to put it up here. Then -1 is going to be -1. Half is going to be -2. -1/4 is going to be about here. Okay. -1/8 is going to be -8. So about here. Then -8, sorry, it's not -8, +1/8 is going to be having a y value of +8. So about here. Then 1/4 is going to be 4. So about here. Then half is going to be 2. Okay. Then 1 is here. 2 is about here, 3 is going to be here, and 4 is going to be right there. Okay, once I've plotted my points, I'm just going to do my best in one motion and just draw it. Just like so. Making sure when you're doing it, you're putting the arrows in the lines. Make sure you keep going just a little bit more after the point. Okay. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other one at the bottom here. Oh. Just like that. So my graph will look something like this. And one thing I need to do is I need to label it. This will be y equals 1 over x. All right, once I've done that, I'm going to go through my next question, which is it possible for y to equal to 0? Okay, let's look at it. Is it possible for y to equal to 0? So what I mean is the following. Apologies for that. Is it possible for y to equal to 0? Technically, no, because if I were to look at my y-axis here, yeah, where I'm doing in my red line, my red pen, it never touches 0. There's no y-intercept here. So no, it's not possible for y to equal to 0. Okay. Now, question D. What happens to the value of y as x gets larger? For example, 10, 100, 1000. All right, let's look at it. It's in the positive, right? So I'm looking around here. As it gets larger, the x gets larger, the y value gets smaller. So that's what I'm going to write. Okay. So I'm going to write down y gets smaller. Or it just approaches to 0. That will be a better word to write. It approaches to 0. It doesn't reaches to 0, but it approaches to 0. Okay, never touches there. Question E, what happens to the value of y as x gets closer and closer to 0, approaching from the right? So for example, 1/10, 1 100ths, 1 1000ths. So meaning that I'm looking at this part here. I'm looking at when it becomes fractions. Well, the moment that it becomes fractions and it gets closer to my 0, right? It seems like it exponentially just goes larger. So what I'm going to write down for E is going to be y gets larger. Okay, that's it. Now for F, what happens to the value of y as x gets smaller? For example, -10, -100, -1000. So let's look at the values of when the values of x gets larger in the sense of -2, -3, -4. Well, for this one, it seems like it approaches closer to 0, right? My y value approaches towards 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down for F, y approaches to 0. Then for question G, what happens to the value of y as x gets closer and closer to 0, approaching from the left? Meaning that it's an example of -1/10, -1 100ths. So that means my fractions, right? So I'm dealing with now this part here. This part here. Yeah. What happens? Well, it actually gets smaller, right? Because the bigger the negative number, the smaller the number actually is. So what I'm going to actually write down is for G, y gets smaller. Okay. Now, the very most important part out of this video will be writing the equations of the two asymptotes of this hyperbola. Okay, to find the asymptote, just look at your graph again. Okay, when we're looking at our graph again, right? See, where does it never never touches? Well, we looked at from my red line here is that my x or my graph will never reach a y-intercept, right? So that means this here, this equation of this red line here is actually x equal to 0. It'll never reach x equal to 0, right? Another one would be this one here in the green, right? As the number gets larger, okay, for example, 3, 4, 5, 6, or -3, -4, -5, right? It gets closer to 0, but never touches 0, right? So that means that is my x-intercept. There will be no x-intercepts. And when there's no x-intercepts, what turns into 0? Y. So this green equation here is going to be y equal to 0. Okay? So my two equations for my asymptote is going to be y equal to 0. So that's my x-intercept. There will be no x-intercepts. And x equal to 0, meaning there will be no y-intercept. Hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please just rewatch the video and ask me any questions. See you. Bye.